What if Levan Saginashvili actually has one weakness? And most people have been looking in completely the wrong place. Everyone sees Levan's size, his massive arms, and the insane amount of power he can put on the table. But here's what most people don't realize. Being incredibly strong doesn't mean every part of your strength can be used in every position. And that's exactly where things start getting interesting. Because Levan's biggest problem isn't simply finding someone stronger than him. It's finding a way to stop him from using his strength the way he wants. If you want to know, don't even think about skipping this video. Let's get started. The secret behind Levan's strength. Think about what happens when two people arm wrestle. You might assume the stronger person simply pushes harder and wins. But that's not really how elite arm wrestling works. A wrestler can have incredible strength and still struggle if his hand, wrist, or body position is taken away from him. And this is one of the biggest reasons Levan is so dangerous. He doesn't just overpower an opponent. He makes it extremely difficult for that opponent to use their own strength effectively. Once Levan gets the position he wants, his hand, wrist, arm, and body can all work together. And suddenly, the opponent isn't just fighting Levan's arm. They're fighting the entire system behind it. But if that system is so difficult to break, where could the first crack actually appear? The first battle isn't the pin. Before an opponent even thinks about pinning Levan, there's another battle happening. The battle for the hand. If Levan controls your hand and wrist, he can start dictating the position of the match. And once your wrist starts getting compromised, your arm can't always produce force the way you want it to. That's why Levan's massive hand and forearm aren't just impressive to look at. They help him control the fight before the actual finish even happens. But this creates an important question. What happens if an opponent can prevent Levan from getting that perfect control in the first place? That's where things get much more interesting. The position Levan doesn't want to lose. Levan is at his most dangerous when his body can stay connected and his strongest movements can work together. His hand controls the opponent. His wrist helps maintain the position. His arm produces enormous force. And his shoulders and back help transfer that force. But the moment an opponent forces the match away from that ideal position, things can become more complicated. Not because Levan suddenly becomes weak, but because even an elite athlete has positions that are less comfortable than others. And that gives us our first real clue. When size stops being the whole advantage. Levan's size is one of his biggest weapons. But here's something people often forget. Size is only an advantage when you can use it efficiently. The bigger and more powerful the athlete, the more important positioning becomes. If an opponent can force Levan into an uncomfortable angle, keep his hand from dominating, and make him work from a less favorable position, then some of that enormous power becomes harder to apply. And that's the key. Levan doesn't become weak. His opponent simply makes his strength harder to access. But knowing that isn't enough. Because there's a huge difference between finding a weakness and actually exploiting it. The real weakness, Levan's biggest vulnerability, isn't some tiny muscle that isn't strong enough. It's the possibility of being forced away from the positions where his entire strength system works together. If his hand control is challenged, if his wrist position is compromised, if his opponent can keep the match in an awkward position, then Levan may have to rely on different parts of his strength instead of putting everything together at once. And against an athlete of Levan's level, even creating that situation is extremely difficult. Because the moment you give him an opening, he can turn it into power. So the real weakness isn't simply, Levan isn't strong enough here. It's, can you force Levan into a position where his greatest strengths don't work together? And that leads to the next question. Why hasn't anyone just exploited it? If this is the potential weakness, why doesn't every elite arm wrestler simply use it? Because Levan isn't going to sit there and let you set the match up perfectly. You still have to get past his hand. You still have to survive his wrist pressure. You still have to deal with his arm strength. And you still have to maintain your own position while he's trying to destroy it. That's why beating Levan isn't about knowing one secret technique. You need the physical ability to create the situation. And the technique to keep it there. And only a very small number of athletes even have the tools to attempt that. Who could actually exploit it? This is where different styles become interesting. Someone like Devon Larratt brings an incredible amount of experience and tactical understanding. Ermes Gasparini has the kind of explosive power and hand strength that can create problems. Vitaly Laletin brings enormous leverage and a completely different physical structure. And other elite heavyweights have their own weapons. But there's a catch. Having one advantage against Levan doesn't automatically mean you can beat him. You need a complete game plan that keeps him away from his strongest position. And that's incredibly difficult. The biggest misunderstanding about Levan. Here's the part most people get wrong. When we say Levan has a weakness, we're not saying he's suddenly easy to beat. That's not what a weakness means at this level. Every elite athlete has situations where they are less dominant. The difference is that Levan has so many physical and technical advantages that reaching one of those situations can be incredibly difficult. That's why his dominance can look almost unfair. His weakness may exist, but his strengths are protecting it. And now we can finally answer the original question. So, can Levan actually be beaten? Yes, in theory. But the answer isn't simply finding someone with bigger arms or more raw power. The person who wants to challenge Levan needs to do something much harder. Take away his hand control. Force him away from his preferred position. Prevent his body from working as one connected system. And then survive long enough to take advantage of it. That's why Levan remains such a difficult opponent. His biggest weakness isn't that he lacks strength. It's that, like every athlete, his strength becomes less effective when he's forced away from the positions where he can use all of it together. And maybe that's the real secret behind trying to beat someone who looks almost unbeatable. You don't always have to be stronger than the strongest man. Sometimes, you just have to stop him from being strong in the way he wants. Now you know what Levan's weakness is. But there's still something you need to understand. How did Levan become this incredibly strong in the first place? If you want to find out, click on the video on your screen.